If somebody's not losing body fat, what do you typically think they're doing wrong?
It's a very broad question. There could be a lot of things going on. Well, first off, basically, and it's way more complex than this, but basically, if they're not losing body fat, then they're not burning more calories than they're taking in, or they're taking in more calories than they're burning. Okay, so you have to create that deficit, that imbalance of calories, so that your body then takes energy from itself. Okay, so if that's not happening, then it doesn't matter what you're doing, you're not going to burn or lose body fat. But that's super broad. What you eat contributes a lot to how you feel. It also contributes to how much fat you lose versus how much muscle you potentially lose. An often non-discussed factor in dieting is that a natural phenomenon happens when you reduce your calories. When you reduce your calories, one of your body's main adaptations is to meet the new caloric intake by lowering its energy expenditure. In essence, your body slows its metabolism down. And one of the primary ways it does this is by paring muscle down. So if you were to take a bunch of people who needed to lose, let's say 20 pounds, and let's say you found out that all of the people their bodies were burning on average, let's say 2,500 calories a day. And you said, okay, cool, we're going to put them on a 1,500 calorie diet. So there's 1,000 calorie difference. You would see weight loss, but what you would see if you look closer was at least 30 to 40% of that weight would come from muscle. So if they lost 10 pounds, 3 to 4 of those pounds would be coming from muscle. And that's because the body, in the meantime, is using fat for energy, but is also simultaneously trying to reduce its energy expenditure by paring muscle down. And that's a big problem, because if you slow your metabolism down, that makes the fat loss unsustainable. And obviously, what you don't want to end up in a situation where you're smaller but the same flabbiness, essentially, or weak on top of it. With a fat loss type program, you want to strength train to offset that. And you also want to look at the composition of macronutrients that you're taking in. Primarily, you want it to be high protein. In fact, there's studies that compare calorie-controlled diets, meaning, two groups, same calories, one eats high protein, the other doesn't. They lose the same amount of weight, but the high protein group loses more fat and less muscle, or in some cases doesn't lose muscle at all if it's combined with strength training. So that's it in a nutshell. Now, the question is, what if somebody can't lose fat? Well, it depends on the individual. There could be a lot of different reasons, right? It could be that they're not exercising enough. It could also be that they're exercising too much. A lot of people don't realize this, but doing a lot of exercise above and beyond what your body can adapt to, recover and adapt to. And I say recover and adapt because those are two different things. Recovery is your body healing from damage. Adaptation is above and beyond recovery. So to give you an example, if I were to rub my skin with a rough, let's say sandpaper, and I wore my skin down a little bit, my body would heal the skin, but then it would add a couple extra layers of skin. Eventually it would become a callus, right? But it would add a couple layers of skin so that my body would not get the same kind of damage if the same insult happened again, okay? This is what happens with exercise. So let's say you do some strength training, you cause some damage, your body recovers, and it also then adapts so that next time that same insult doesn't cause the same problems. If you do more than your body can deal with, which in many cases isn't much. So a lot of people misjudge themselves. They're high stress, they don't get good sleep, they have poor diet, they're not exercising, then they go to the gym and they say, I'm going to start working out 4 days a week. This will be great. Not realizing this too much. Or they work out too hard, not realizing this too much. The body then just gets preoccupied with recovery. It doesn't even adapt. It's just like heal, let's just heal, let's just heal. And so you get sore, go back to the, you recover, go back to the gym, get sore, recover, go back to the gym, and you never progress. You're like, why am I not progressing? Or you do more than you can recover from, in which case your body's in this stress situation. In this stress situation, your body aims to protect itself by reducing caloric burn and by improving its ability to store calories. Why? Because one of the safeguards against stress that our bodies have is fat storage. Walking around with body fat on your body is like walking around with money in the bank. It's energy that I have. It's like a camel with its hump, right? It's like energy I have. So if you're too much stress, too hard of workouts, body can't deal with it, it will actually lose more muscle and try to and figure out how to gain body fat. And this is why we get in those really frustrating situations where you get people who are working out 5 days a week. They're eating very little calories. They lost weight initially, but then they plateaued and like, what is going on? I still have 30 pounds to lose, but I'm exercising like crazy and I'm barely eating anything and I feel like garbage. And then they quit. Of course they quit, because why would you continue doing that, torturing yourself? So it really depends on the individual, what they're doing, what they've done for me to give them the correct advice. So that, I mean, it's such a broad question. It could go so many different directions. And then there's other things too, like if your health is off, if you have nutrient deficiencies, hormone imbalances, those can also impede your body's ability to burn body fat. But typically what it is inappropriate exercise routine. Strength training needs to be the foundation. It's the best form of exercise when it comes to fat loss. The data is clear on that. Speeds up the metabolism, burns body fat, not muscle, improves insulin sensitivity. So appropriate exercise, adequate diet that puts you in a slight calorie deficit, good sleep, and then that typically results in some nice consistent fat loss.
I love how you brought up the reducing calories and not strength training idea, because I think it's a really important concept for people to grasp, that it's not just as simple as cutting calories. Like, you have to actually speed up your metabolism and increase the amount of calories your body burns at rest and just build more muscle. But you also said that a lot of people, they kind of do it, I don't want to say wrong, but wrong for their situation. They're overstressed and they're over exercising, or they see on the internet that you got to work out 5 days a week, 6 days a week and do the certain body part splits. They do that. Or somebody just says, you know what, I can be good with 15 minutes of strength training per week, and they do that. So I guess what I'm getting at is, like, how can somebody like 85, 90% of the population, the general population, begin to kind of cultivate like a strength training program that's going to be best for their situation?
Well, there's a few things. The average person would get exceptional results for a long period of time, because there's a lot you could do with this, with about 45 to 60 minutes twice a week of strength training, okay? Or 20 minutes a day, 5 or 6 days a week of strength training where you do like a couple exercises. That's appropriate for most people. Now, the next question is, what's the intensity like? Okay, fine, it's only 2 workouts. I must need to beat myself up. No. If you're not active now or not exercising now, it takes very little to get your body to start moving in the right direction. Going above and beyond that, again, will impede on your body's ability to adapt. A good rule of thumb, or a couple rules of thumb. One, you should feel more energized at the end of your workout than you did when you started. If you feel like you got beat up, if you feel like you're just wasted and depleted, you did too much. So if you start your workout at, let's say, a 7 with energy, you finish your workout like, man, I'm like a 10. Like, okay, probably the right amount of intensity. Also, treat strength training like skill acquisition. In other words, instead of going to the gym and thinking I'm going to hit legs, go to the gym and say, I'm going to practice squats and I'm going to get good at them. Or instead of thinking I'm going to go hit back, go to the gym and say, I'm going to go practice pull-ups and get really good at them. Or I'm going to practice overhead press and get really good at it. That tends to direct people in the right direction when it comes to intensity, because they're perfecting the skill. They get more out of the exercise with better technique, and they end up getting stronger more effectively versus just trying to fatigue a particular body part, which typically results in poor technique, form, and over application of intensity.
And I think also most people, they kind of go to the gym and at times they have like poor exercise selection. I think at times, like, I think when you only have 45 minutes twice a week, I think just going in and doing like calf raises and bicep curls, well, I think like for the novice exerciser, it can be great because you're at least, the whole something is better than nothing mentality. But I think for the person who's really trying to make the most of their time and get results, I think you have to be careful with what you do. So like, what would you say is like the do this, not that regarding exercise selection?
So long as you can perform these with good technique. I mean, the best exercises you're going to do are these what are known as gross motor movement exercises or compound exercises. So now why? Because they do so much for the amount of time spent doing them. You're going to get so much more bang for your buck. So an example of a 45-minute workout would be 3 sets of barbell squats, 3 sets of bench press, 3 sets of barbell row, and maybe 3 sets of overhead press. Okay. So you've done 4 exercises, but you've essentially worked the entire body. And you've got a lot of bang for your buck. Another example would be like, deadlifts, pull-ups, an incline press, and maybe a seated overhead press or something like that, right? So compound lifts will give you much better results for the time spent doing them than those isolation kind of single joint type exercises. Like, you're going to get better bicep gains from doing, supinated grip pull-ups while you're squeezing your arms at the top than you will from curls. These compound lifts just tend to work better that way. Now, I'm not saying there's no benefit to the single joint isolation exercises. I think they're valuable, especially for correctional exercise purposes, and especially as you become much more advanced and you need to add more volume to your training. But I mean, if I took somebody right now who was a relative beginner and I had them strength train and I picked, 10 compound lifts and that's all we did, and then, we progressed them with weight and, maybe sets and stuff like that. I mean, you're looking at 2 or 3 years of consistent progress without having to ever do anything else.
And so I think one of the other things, at least as in my experience as a trainer, also I think when I was starting out just on my own workout journey, that can be challenging for people is how do you figure out like the right intensity? I know you kind of touched on that. Like, how do you actually start to progress in the gym? Because you can have the workout program all day and just say, oh, I'm going to do squats, I'm going to bench, I'm going to bent over row. But if you're not pushing yourself and giving your muscles a reason to grow, they're not going to grow. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, but the reason to grow is, the reason is above and beyond what your body's used to. So when I train, it's very different. I've been working out for decades than, let's say, somebody who's just getting started. Someone who's just getting started who's very sedentary, one set of 10 reps of bodyweight squats will be enough to get some strength gains going. If I did that, it wouldn't do anything. I think practicing the lifts, number one, and number two, you want to stop typically about 2 or 3 reps before you think you're going to not be able to do the exercise anymore with good form. So if you're doing squats and you're on rep number 8 and you're like, I think I might be able to get 2 more good reps, stop right there. So about 2 reps short of what would be considered failure, but we define failure as form breakdown, not I can't move anymore. That's too much.
And so do you think like comparing something like a leg press to a squat is almost like irrelevant? Like they're essentially doing the same type of thing as long as you're hitting it?
I mean, you could say that. I mean, a squat is just so much more superior than a leg press, but they're both compound lifts. So you could put them in the same general category, I would say. Squat is just much more functional, different range of motion. You're supporting the weight by standing. It requires more skill. It improves more functionality and mobility. It's also harder to do, though. So a lot of beginners won't be able to do a barbell squat. So a leg press might be a good substitute.
So as far as like overrated and underrated exercises, what would you say are a few that stand out to you that you've seen over the years?
It's a tough question because you got to understand my background, right? I trained people and I trained trainers for 2 decades.
Right.
Every exercise is extremely valuable when it's applied in the right place. And every exercise can be dangerous or invaluable if it's used or applied inappropriately. So that's a tough question to answer. I would say, generally speaking, focusing on those big gross motor movements are going to move you in the right direction. Overrated exercises tend to be, not always true, but tend to be these kind of isolation-based exercises or movements where some bodybuilder says, work this specific part of the muscle type of deal. That tends to be, those tend to be a waste of time for many people. Like I said, those big compound lifts you'll just get so far with them. Those other exercises, like I've seen people go sideways on a chest press machine and do I could see some value in specific populations, but most people, like, why are you wasting your time doing that?
Right. Well, what about like balancing on like a ball and doing like squats? Like that's what I think about when people are like, oh, well, I'm working the stabilizing muscles.
I mean, again, it depends on what we're trying to work on. If we are trying to work on balance and stability, it may be valuable.
Right.
Now, it got overused for a while there in the training space where everything was on a balance ball. But in some cases, it may be valuable. Now, if you see someone loading plates on a bar and standing on a physio ball, like, yeah, now you're doing it. I don't know what you're doing now. I tell you, there's a lot of mistakes people make.
Mm-hmm.
One mistake is over applying intensity, not resting long enough. That's a big mistake. People think that if the workout is making you sweat, then it's better. So let's cut the rest periods and turn this into cardio with weights. That becomes now why lift weights? You're just doing cardio with weights. You're not getting the benefits of strength training. I see that being a common issue. Obviously, technique, not paying attention to technique and form tends to be a big problem. I'm trying to think of exercises that I would say, wouldn't be so beneficial to lots of people. I think combination exercises are tend to be stupid. Like when you see someone do like a lunge to curl to overhead press, we see trainers combining like 4 or 5 exercises. You're not getting a lot out of doing all of that because the weight is insufficient for some of the movement and also too much for other parts of the movement, unless your goal is to get good at doing a squat curl or lunge curl to overhead press. So combination exercise. But I think the biggest problem is like circuits.
Yeah.
They're good for stamina and endurance, but there's better ways to build stamina and endurance. You're using weights in a way that is not valuable. If you're going to do strength training, do it to build strength. If you want to build endurance and stamina, there are great ways to build endurance and stamina, and weight training isn't necessarily one of them. Using an Airdyne bike or sprints or, that kind of stuff is probably going to be better for that.
One of the things that I did early on in my fitness journey was like superset. I read like the Arnold's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, and it was like chest and back. So it was like, I forget the exact workout, but it was like you bench, do a set of pull-ups, bench. Yeah. Do you think that's effective if people are resting accordingly?
Superset is different because it's not so many exercises that it becomes cardiovascular. Superset's 2 exercises. I can see there's definite value to a superset for, I'd say for bodybuilding in particular. There's a lot of different ways to do superset. You mentioned one way, which is where you're training agonist and antagonist. So chest and back superset would be an example, or a quad hamstring superset. More commonly, supersets are a compound to isolation or vice versa. So it'd be like chest press to chest fly or chest fly to chest press. You'll see that more commonly. But I see there's some value for bodybuilding. You get a really, really intense pump from that kind of training. The pump itself probably signals some muscle growth. It probably increases the sarcoplasm within muscle, which is all the non-muscle fiber structures and fluids within muscle. There's some strength stamina benefits. So there's some muscle building benefits from supersets for sure. But when you start to combine 4 or 5 exercises, now you're in the territory of like cardio.
Right. And I know, like, I don't know if we've talked about this before, but like I think when I went from good to great as a trainer, it was when, early on in my career, and I think a lot of trainers do this, like the goal was just to get your clients to sweat as much as possible and make them feel like they got a quote unquote good workout. And it was doing things like burpees and renegade rows, which I think is another like way overrated, stupid exercise in my opinion. And I think it's highly dangerous for a lot of people, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like an exercise like a renegade row, okay? If I'm doing that just to get you tired, yeah, it's dumb.
Right.
And a lot of us did this early in our careers as trainers. It's like, let's just get them tired. Let's pick some hard exercises. A renegade row as a back exercise, dumb. Right. It's not a great back exercise. A renegade row as a counter rotation exercise, pretty good. That's actually the value. The value of it is not the row. The value is in strengthening what's called counter rotation. Now, there are other ways to do counter rotation that might be better. But again, that's my point. Like exercises applied improperly means that they're worthless or dumb, regardless of the exercise. Exercises applied properly in the right context means they're valuable. So I could take an exercise like a hip adduction machine, right? The one where you squeeze your knees together.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are like, why are you doing that? It's such a small muscle, waste of time or whatever. Well, I mean, for correctional exercise purposes or for some specific forms of hip instability, it's very valuable. Might be the most valuable exercise someone can do within their workout. I mean, I can think of other ways to do it as well, but my point is it's not as cut and dry as people think. But, if someone's like basically, just asking me a basic question like, I just want to build muscle, speed up my metabolism, get strong, then it's like, okay, deadlift, bench press, squat, overhead press, barbell row, add some rotation, add some split stance stuff, and you're good.
I think one of the other things that people do wrong, and you've touched on this, is just the overemphasis of cardio, whether it be just going to the gym and just strictly doing cardio or keeping your heart rate up too high during strength training sessions or whatever the example is. I know you're a massive fan of walking, and I am too. I mean, I think it's very beneficial. Like, why do you think walking is like the most effective form of cardio for people?
Okay, so again, cardio has some real benefits. There's some things that it's very good at. Intense cardio is good for endurance. Nothing will build more endurance better than cardio. So if your goal is endurance, you need to do cardio. But most people don't do cardio for maximum endurance. Most people do cardio because they want to burn body fat.
Right.
If your goal is to get lean, cardio is a terrible exercise approach. It encourages the muscle pare down or muscle loss that you get from a calorie restricted diet. If you go calorie restriction plus lots of cardio, you're going to lose muscle. Okay, it's just what happens. Your body doesn't need a lot of strength for cardio. It's actually trying to become more efficient because you're bringing in low calories and because you're burning a lot of calories. See, cardio burns a lot of calories while you do it. So you're sending a signal to your body that says, we're burning a lot of calories, we're not getting many calories. Become or turn into a calorie efficient machine. Pares muscle down. So if you want to lose muscle, you'll lose some fat, but you want to lose muscle, that's a great way to do it. Now, if you want lots of endurance and stamina, go for it. That's one of the best ways to develop it. Now, okay, why do I pick walking as a great activity? It doesn't burn as many calories as running or swimming, but it also requires far less skill. Here's the thing that people don't consider at all, okay? When people lace up their shoes and decide they're going to go start running at the age of 35, and they haven't really consistently run since they were kids, they forget that running is a skill that they forgot. Okay, so to be very clear, there are very few physical skills that humans evolved to do well. One of them is running. Humans are exceptional distance runners. In fact, we can outrun a very fit distance runner, can outdistance almost any animal. In fact, there used to be a race that was done decades ago where they had a horse race a human, but it was a distance race. And oftentimes a human would win. We're just really good at running for distance. In fact, this is how we probably hunted as hunter-gatherers. We would throw a spear at an animal and then run after it until it got tired. We've got these big knee joints. We've got these big glutes. We're upright. So it's this very efficient form of locomotion. The problem is, like any type of movement, your body develops neural pathways. It develops muscle recruitment patterns. It's a skill, okay? Just like if I took you right now and had you lay in bed for 10 years and then you stood up, walking would be difficult.
Right.
You'd feel weak, shaky, and you wouldn't even have the skill for it. You'd be like, oh, I got to relearn how to walk. So running, people don't run. We stop running when we're kids and they decide they're going to go run for fitness. Here's what happens though. They don't look at running and say, I got to go relearn how to run. They go, I need to go get in shape, so I'm just going to run until I get tired. First off, they don't have the skill of running. Number two, they're going to run until they're tired, so their technique is going to go even worse. It's no wonder that the injury rate with running for fitness is more often than not. In other words, if right now you're listening or watching this and you pick up running for fitness, the odds that you'll hurt yourself in the next year or two are higher than you won't. Okay. And it's because it's a skill and it's a high impact movement and you don't ever do it and nobody treats it like a skill and they just go run to fatigue and then they hurt themselves. So that's why I don't like running or I don't like other forms of cardio for that. Walking, we still don't live in the world of Wall-E. Remember that cartoon Wall-E?
Yeah.
So we still don't float around on chairs all day. We still know how to walk. So I could take almost anybody and say, hey, I want you to walk more, and they're not going to hurt themselves. So that's number one. Number one, the skill is already there. They could just go add the activity. They're not going to hurt themselves. Number two, walking doesn't cause a lot of stress and damage on the body. In fact, you could argue that walking in many cases is rejuvenating and recuperative. Running is never that. Hardcore cycling, never that, right? Hardcore swimming, never that, right? Walking is, you could go on a stroll and you're active and you're moving. It's good for your health, but it's also not compromising your body's ability to recover. You're not filling your stress bucket. So it's a wonderful form of activity to pair with the most effective form of exercise for things like fat loss, like strength training. So if I have someone strength training, they're going to place most of the focus on the strength training. Then when we add activity, I'm going to add a form of activity that's not going to compromise their recovery and isn't going to be a skill that they have to relearn. I mean, that's what you got to do with strength training too. You got to learn the skill. Thankfully, people respect strength training more and know there's at least some technique. With, like I said, with running, they typically don't. So that's why I recommend walking. It's easier to do, results in less injury, good for the body, and for people under lots of stress, not good sleep, poor diet, whatever, it doesn't tend to overburden the body.
So I think people, they kind of get confused with something like walking because it's like something they already naturally will do a little bit of throughout the day or subconsciously. So they have a hard time like programming like walking. You know, if you don't have like a dog where you're forced to walk, like how do you recommend somebody program?
So this old advice I thought was dumb that now it turned out to be incredibly good. Couple ways you could do it. One is you get a step counter and track your steps throughout the day, and then start doing something like this. Park your car at the far end of the parking lot. Use the stairs instead of the elevator. Use the far bathroom instead of the near bathroom, and then track your steps. And what'll happen with those small things is you'll add like 1,000 or 2,000 steps a day. Like if you work in an office, right, and there's a bathroom on your floor, but there's also one on the second floor, and you park on the far side of the parking lot, throughout the day, you'll add a significant amount of steps. Okay. So that's one way to do it. And I like that because it's not scheduled workouts. The second way you could do it is by attaching the habit of walking to something that you already do. One of the best things to attach it to is your meals. So walk for 10 minutes after breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There's your 30-minute walk. 10 minutes after breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Not only is it add that activity, but it also improves things like digestion and insulin sensitivity. In fact, it's a very fast way of improving insulin sensitivity, and that has some pretty far-reaching effects on health.
So you talked about like overtraining and undernourishing yourself as it being like kind of damaging to people's health if they're not careful. Is there anything else you see people do consistently that is actually damaging their health when it comes to health and fitness?
Sleep is a big one, but I'll give you one on sleep that I think makes a huge difference. So by now, I think people now have heard it enough that you need to have 7 to 8 hours of sleep, and then there's also quality sleep. You need to have good quality sleep. Lack of optimal sleep or suboptimal sleep patterns, okay? Now, if it's really bad, like you're just, especially if you have a newborn, like people know what that feels like. But most people are just kind of suboptimal, okay? Instead of 7 to 8, they're like 6.5, 6. Instead of like super good quality, get all 4 stages of REM sleep and the appropriate ratios. It's not that. It's kind of broken, wake up throughout the night type of deal. That has a profound, even though you can get about your day, even though you can function, with caffeine and stuff like that, you're looking at hormone imbalances, compromised ability to recover from stress, which includes exercise, increased cravings for hyperpalatable foods, and behavior impacts. So the downstream effects of that are you don't get as lean as easily, and you don't build muscle as effectively, and you just don't feel as good. One thing you could do to improve your sleep that a lot of people don't talk about is, remember when you worked a regular job and you had, you went on a regular schedule, and everybody complains about Monday?
Right.
The reason why people complain about Monday is because Monday through Friday, we wake up and go to bed. Well, Monday through Thursday, we wake up and go to bed at the same time. So, okay, I'll wake up at 7 a.m., I go to bed at 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. And you do this the same. Friday comes around, you're like, cool, I don't work tomorrow. I'm going to stay up real late. They stay up real late because they're like, I'm going to sleep in on Saturday. And then Saturday night, I'm going to go to bed late, so I'm going to sleep in on Sunday. Then Sunday comes around like, crap, I better try to go to bed early because I got to wake up early tomorrow. Well, guess what you just did? You've changed your circadian rhythm and given yourself jet lag. You actually given yourself, this is why everybody hates Monday. You give yourself jet lag every single week because you go to bed late and try to sleep in Friday and Saturday. So one thing you could do that will have a profound impact on sleep quality, that will improve it by 20% or so, is to simply go to bed and wake up at the same time every day, whether it's Monday, whether it's Friday, Saturday, or Sunday.
You talked about the craving for hyperpalatable foods, which I think is a big problem when it comes to people who are looking to build muscle, lose fat, like what we've been talking about. And you talked about the importance of protein, eating a high protein diet at the beginning of the episode. When it comes to nutrition, I know we've talked about this a bunch on the show already, but like, what do you think is the most important like rules for people to kind of keep in mind regarding nutrition?
Generally speaking, if people followed just 2 guidelines, they would fall within a good, relatively decent body fat percentage. And that's this. Eat your target body weight in grams of protein. So if you want to weigh 150 pounds, 150 grams. If you want to weigh 180 pounds, 180 grams. and this is backed by tons of data, right? A high protein diet, you lose more fat, build more muscle, you have more hippocampus, growth or less atrophy in the brain as you age. That just came out from a study. It's more satiety producing. So high protein diet tends to make you eat less calories across the board. It's very, it's very consistent in the data. It regulates insulin, which also has an impact on your cravings and your appetite and blood sugar control. So number one, eat your body weight, your goal body weight in grams of protein. And number two, eat whole natural foods and avoid heavily processed foods. That's it. That's it. If most people did that, they would fall within the healthy range of body fat. Now, I'm not saying you're going to get ripped and six-pack and shredded. You got to get a little more granular for that. But for the average person who's overweight or obese, if you just did that, you don't count calories, you don't count anything else, you just, okay, I got to eat 150 grams of protein a day, so I'm going to have 50 grams of protein for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'm going to make sure so it's 8 ounces of chicken, whatever. Eat that first, because prioritize it, and avoid heavily processed foods. You'll fall within that healthy body fat percentage range over time.
So if you want to take it one step further and the people who are looking to lose like the excess belly fat and get a six-pack, what are some other rules you think people should implement?
Once you do that and you do it consistently and you combine it with strength training and you get within a good, healthy body fat percentage range, then you get a little bit more granular. Then what you do is you track your calories, find out what you've been eating on a regular basis, get your average, and then reduce it. And then eat that new reduction. And then you'll start to see more body fat. So let's say you're 15% body fat as a guy. You're calculating your calories because you did what I said, right? Protein and whole natural foods. You're like, okay, I'm eating 2,800 calories a day on average. I'm 15% body fat. I want to get down to 12. Well, bring your calories now down to 2,200 calories. Give yourself a 500 or 600 calorie deficit. And that'll result in a nice, few pounds of body fat loss per month. And you'll get yourself down to that 12% body fat within a couple months.
This episode is brought to you by Element. Whether or not you're working out, hydration is important. Water alone is key, but drinking water on its own sometimes just doesn't cut it. That's where Element electrolytes come in. They have formulated a science-backed electrolyte ratio that tastes absolutely amazing. Plus, it doesn't have any sugar, artificial colors, or other sketchy ingredients to hold you back. I've been using Element for years. My favorite flavor is definitely the citrus salt. I take it either first thing in the morning when I wake up or after a workout or a run. After taking it, I always feel replenished and ready to move on to the next thing I am doing. I know when I'm properly hydrated, I perform and feel my best. So if you're looking to optimize your hydration, go to drinklmnt.com/DougBopst to get a free sample pack with any purchase. Again, go to drinklmnt.com/DougBopst or visit the link below to get a free sample pack with any purchase. Now back to the show.
I want to shift gears a little bit because obviously a lot of what you talk about on my podcast, on Mind Pump, is all about like building muscle, optimizing your health, losing fat, like all the things. One of the things I know you've been really, really excited about, probably the most exciting thing you've been talking about, is your journey with faith. Like, why are you so passionate about that right now?
I would say I'm growth minded, and I have been since I was a kid, always seeking to learn. When my friends were outside playing, I'd like to stay in the house and read. I like fitness for that purpose. I mean, I got into fitness because I was insecure, but I stayed with it because of the growth, the personal growth aspect of it. I speak about this all the time. It's a great vehicle for personal growth. Your relationship to pain changes. You learn to accept yourself. I mean, it's funny because most people get into working out because they want to look different and they want to look like someone else or whatever. You stay with it long enough as you start to accept yourself. Like, I'm never going to look like Arnold, but this is me type of deal. You get, you develop a good work ethic, et cetera. So it's a growth-minded pursuit. But, all these growth-minded pursuits left me unsatisfied, unfulfilled. Something wasn't there. Something was missing. So I just continued to pursue. And the question of faith, I think, will come up for anybody if they're looking. It's funny, if you're interested in personal growth long enough, you're going to run into this. Okay, it's just what happens. Eventually, you run into the questions of, why are we here? What's my purpose? What's the meaning behind things? How did things start? Is it just the seen world? Is there an unseen world? Like, these are all important questions I think humans have been. We naturally will ask if you give us quiet time long enough. And so this is just something that I've always looked at. As a young man, was an atheist, hardcore atheist. So, I mean, to the point where I would have debated anybody who was religious. I thought I would have done a pretty good job. I was a smart kid, read a lot of books, and so I would have proven facts and whatever. It's funny, C.S. Lewis was an atheist too, and I think he said this. I read his book, Mere Christianity, which is exceptional. And, he wrote about this, that atheists are closer to learning or finding God than people that don't think about these things. If you don't think about it, you don't think about it. But I was actually searching and looking. And so that path and that journey eventually brought me to my faith. It brought me to Christ. And why I'm so excited about it is nothing has changed me fundamentally. 7 months ago, I became a Christian. So this is new.
Right.
I haven't been a Christian for very long at all. I'm 45. So I was a grown man. So 7 months ago, like I fully brought Christ into my heart. And that has changed me in ways that can only be described as supernatural. I can't explain. I've worked on behavior change with clients and people. I became an expert on behavior change around nutrition, around exercise, around body image. That's why we have the podcast, what I talk about. I've done my own searching. I've gone to therapists. I've done ketamine therapy, twice, went through that twice. And, you get benefits. You see some change. You see some, you learn things about yourself and why you operate the way you do and your own behaviors and all that stuff. The changes I see in myself, the changes other people see in me over the last 7 months, again, supernatural is the word that I want to use. It's crazy and it's wild. And the joy that I feel is interesting, to say the least. I think all of us seek happiness, like the feeling of happy, but joy is very different. I watched Bishop Barron he's a Catholic bishop. I had him on my podcast 6 years ago. This was when my journey really started to get going. And that original interview, like the questions I asked him were like real questions I had. So I wasn't trying to make a good podcast. By the way, this was back when talking about your faith, especially if you're a Christian, was like a no-no in media. Like, no,
Right.
that's going to kill your views and whatever. All of a sudden, by the way, it seems like there's a cultural shift and people are coming out and talking about their Christianity in ways that I never really saw in media before, which is kind of cool. But 6 years ago, it wasn't like that. And I had him on my podcast, and something was drawing me for some reason to talk to him, and I interviewed him, and those were all like real questions that I had. And that kind of started, me on this journey that I'm on now. But it wasn't until 7 months ago when I really made that final leap that I saw these and felt these remarkable changes in myself. But one thing that he talked about, he has a video where he talks about the Beatitudes. And the Beatitudes are like, blessed are the meek, those types of things, right? And he talks about the Beatitudes, and I'd never heard him explain the way he explained them. Blessed are the poor in spirit. That's one, right? And you think, what does it mean? Is being wealthy a sin? Blessed are the meek. Is being strong a sin? Like, this is weird, but that's not what they mean. What they mean is, how blessed are you if you don't worship money, if you don't worship power, if you don't worship honor or fame, if you don't worship wealth or pleasure. And so that's the Beatitudes. And so I was like, wow, that's profound. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And then what he does in the video is it cuts, and he's standing in front of a very old painting of Christ on the cross. And it's one of those old paintings where, if you look at the old ones, they really depict the realism of what it was like, the gruesome look. I mean, somebody who actually gets crucified, it would be a terrible thing to see, right? He's got nails in his hands, and he's covered in blisters, and he's cut, and he points to him, and he says, here is Christ on the cross. Power, he has none. Pleasure, he's at the limits of human pain and despair. And he's literally going down the Beatitudes, and Jesus on the cross is ridiculed and shamed and beaten and killed and stripped of everything, and yet he's doing his Father's will. And he said, if this is correct, then this is a picture of joy. And that's when it occurred to me, when you see people who do things like volunteer their time and energy to help others, or, stretch themselves, and you're like, but they find joy in it. Joy is present when you're tired. It's present when you're sad. It's present when you're stressed. It's different than happiness. And I felt that. And I feel that now, and I never felt that before. So I could be exhausted, I could be stressed. I could be sick and yet feel joyful. It's a way different feeling than happiness. It's something that's it's hard to explain. It's fulfilling.
So I think your audience and even me, like as somebody who's been your friend for years, they looked at you before all of this. They're like, oh, like Sal's got it together. You know, I know you've been through divorce and you've had trouble with that and stuff with body image that you've talked about. But generally speaking, you seem like somebody that like has your stuff completely together, you know, financially, professionally, you know, personally and stuff. What were some of the demons you were battling, like behind closed doors, that led you down this path of spirituality?
First off, someone might have it together based on the standards of the world, but that doesn't mean they have it together. I now understand that, you know, we were created to walk with God, to accept him and have him guide you, and to submit to his will, not yours, because you don't know what the hell you want. You think you do. That's what we're made for. When you move away from that, you feel that hole, that emptiness. And what do you try to do? You try to fill it with what the world tells you makes you happy. What does the world tell you? Hey, man, you make a lot of money, you're going to be real happy. Hey, man, you got a perfect body, you're going to be real happy. Hey, if you bang a bunch of chicks, you're going to be really happy. Hey, if you know, take this drug because it makes you feel good, that's going to make you happy. Hey, drive fast cars. Hey, whatever. So where's my evidence? Look at the suicide rate with celebrities.
Right.
These are rich, good-looking, tons of women, tons of sex, tons of drugs, tons of party, tons of fame. Why would they commit suicide? What is going on? Why are they, what is it that why is it so painful? Well, what's painful is because they get all the worldly things and they're left with despair. So what were my demons? I mean, everybody has theirs, but my specific ones were, well, first off, I felt uncomfortable in my own skin. It was hard for me to be honest, just across the board, even with myself. So very easy for me to just lie to myself about how I feel about something or whatever. Prayer is the most honest thing I've ever done in my life. Like, you pray to God, he knows everything. So it's like you start to pray and you start to be like, oh wait, that's not true. Wait, that's not true. He knows. What am I doing?
Right.
And the vulnerability comes out. I had specific issues with lust. Lust was something that I struggled with for a long time. By the way, he took that one from me right away. That was one of the first things he took from me that I prayed for. That was just absolute supernatural. Like, you know, I had, like many men, issues with pornography and had tried to stop, tried to whatever. And it was like a drug. I couldn't pull myself, so easily accessible, so stimulating, so whatever. And I prayed for it. I told God, I said, I can't do this. Like I can't do this on my own. I just can't. Which, by the way, that's a powerful thing to admit, is like, I can't, like, because I used to be a very much I can do anything.
Yeah.
I'll do anything I put my mind to. Nothing will stop me type of deal. Now I'm like, no, it's not true at all. And so I said, I cannot, I need help with this, God. Take this from me. I need help with this. And he did. Like, I went from struggling to my desires and my wants changed. I still lust with my wife. Still have that attraction to her. So it's not like my libido changed. It's just, I felt the sin in it. I don't mean the bad, like I had this bad, guilty feeling. I mean, literally, like, it's not attractive to me. It's not attracting me. Suddenly, this happened suddenly, Doug. This isn't like I worked on it over time. It was like gone. And I was like, what is happening here? This is wild. Okay. I couldn't go 3 days without watching pornography. And now suddenly it's 7 months and have no desire to do that. Taken from me. I mean, crazy. The way that I consume content, music, media, compassion and empathy, I could get very angry when I'd see things that I would consider wrongs or injustice or whatever. But now I can feel compassionate for the person on the other end, not justifying their behavior, but more like, man, that person's hurting, and I can see it.
Right.
Changed my joy around my family and my kids. Completely changed my relationship with my wife. We had our own, we had a lot of struggles in our marriage. I have a Christian coach that I work with because, I once I experienced some of this, I was like, I want to just learn. Like I'm in, right? Fully in, that's it. And I hired somebody that I work with once a week. Great guy. And one of the things he taught me is he drew a diagram. It was a triangle. And at the top was Christ, and at the bottom corners were husband and wife. Now, the Bible teaches us that the husband and wife represent the relationship between Christ and his church, his followers, right? The husband is like Christ, the wife is like the church, and both of them complete. This is why marriage in the Bible is such a serious thing, such a big thing, right? So you got husband and wife here. The closer they move to God, what happens? They get closer to each other. It's exactly what we're experiencing. My wife and I would do things to work on our marriage all the time. You get some benefit here and there, get some setbacks. But when we both get closer to God, it's like it all comes together.
There's a really inspiring story I heard you tell on Bradley Martin's podcast about how you actually affirmed your belief in Jesus, and I think it had something to do with was it your daughter going to the hospital and a homeless guy? Talk about that story.
Yeah, that was a weird one, and I talk about that. I mean, there's a lot that led up to that, but that moment was the tipping point for me. So up until this time, I'd been slowly moving in that direction, but I'd never, and I didn't you couldn't have explained this to me then. So for someone who's not there, it's hard to explain, but there's definitely a point where you're here, you're learning, you're trying, you're maybe going to church, maybe reading scripture, and then suddenly you fully accept what Christ did, who he was, and then things change. And so I had a moment, I had one moment that did that. So I have she's almost 2 now, but at the time she was 1. And my wife had noticed some movement pattern issues or some movement issues with her. And she thought, maybe we should get this checked out. Nothing major, but there was just some things she did that, an intuitive mom, my wife's very intuitive. It's like, let's get this checked out. Let's just make sure. So she took her to the pediatrician. Pediatrician looked at her and said, I think she's okay, but let's have you take her to a neurologist. Let's have a neurologist look at her. Just make sure, rule out any neurological issues. So my wife took her to the neurologist, and the neurologist did her assessment. Towards the end of the assessment, my daughter, she would do this thing where she'd straighten her legs out. And there was something about it that got the neurologist a little bit like, And she said, it's probably not this, but we may want to check her out for something called spinal tethering. And spinal tethering is when the spine attaches low on the sacrum. And as the child grows, it stretches the spinal cord and you lose function. And if you catch it early enough, oftentimes you can operate and prevent that from happening or reduce some of the damage. So this was like a scary thing for us because in order to see if she had spinal tethering, we'd have to do an MRI. An MRI for a 1-year-old sucks. I mean, I don't know if you've had an MRI before, but you have to lay in the machine for 30, 40 minutes. A 1-year-old's not going to lay still. So what they do is they put them under general anesthesia, knock your kid out. And general anesthesia is, first off, it's got its own dangers, and number 2, it's not good for a developing brain. So I don't want her to do that. But on the other hand, what if she had spinal tethering? We want to know, but we're not sure. So I'm torn. What do we do? So my wife and I would have these discussions, and I'm like, I think we should wait. My wife's like, but if she starts to lose function, it's too late. So we called the pediatrician. We really trust our pediatrician. We love her. And we said, hey, what should we do? What's your opinion? She said, I tell you what, bring her in for an appointment and I'll do a specific assessment. Based off of what I see, if I can, I'll tell you guys, get the MRI or not. So we said, okay, maybe that'll bring us some clarity. So we booked the appointment. So the day of the appointment comes and I'm driving to the pediatrician's office. And my wife was on her way. We drove separately. And in my car, for the first time, I started praying out loud. I'd never really done that before. Up until this point, my prayer was in my head. There were a couple times I got down on my knees to pray, but it felt silly, so I'd stopped. But I was really in distress, and I started praying out loud in the car. So my prayers were, God, I don't know if you're there. I don't know if I believe you. I need help. I need you to show me. I need something obvious. It can't be subtle. Please, if you're there, show me. I need help with this. I don't know what to do. I need clarity. I need clarity around my daughter. Please forgive me if you're real, and what I'm asking isn't great, but I need something from you. I need to know you're there. So I'm praying out loud. We get to the pediatrician's office, and the pediatrician, the front desk staff tell us that we don't have an appointment that day. So we're like, what are you talking about? So back and forth, a little bit of arguing. And they said, okay, we made a mistake. We'll see her later today. We'll squeeze her in later today. So now I'm annoyed, a little irritated. She goes home. I drive here to work because we have to record a podcast. So I'm driving here and I'm praying again. Same thing. God, if you're there, I need to see. I need something obvious. I need help. I need clarity. And I'm talking. I've never done this before. I'm talking out loud. As I pull in, we used to have a parking lot over here. It's under construction now because they're doing something else there, but there used to be a parking lot. We're downtown. So it's not too weird to see homeless people hanging out in that parking lot. But this was a little extra strange because as I pull in, there's a homeless dude building a fire in the parking lot. He's literally building a fire. He's got a mattress next to him. His buddy's passed out on the mattress. And he's like, you see homeless people and then you see some really, really disturbed, mentally ill ones. That was him. Like he's doing this over the fire. And at this point, it's just like the burnt wood and his hands are in it. His hands are black and he's got markings up and down his face and crazy hair. And I don't remember what he was wearing. It was like he had like a tutu and like a bunch of other things on. So I pull in and I see him. And I remember earlier that day, one of my editors sent me a picture of this guy because he was in the parking lot earlier. And I'm like, oh boy, everybody watch out.
Right.
Kind of as a warning to the staff, like there's somebody in the parking lot. So I pull in, I see him and he's doing that. So I pull in the far side of the parking lot and I'm in my car and I look at my rearview mirror and I can see him. And I remembered a conversation I had with Arthur Brooks, or it might've been a talk that he did, but Arthur Brooks talked about, I don't remember how he got to this, but he said something along the lines of, if you want to help a homeless person and you want to give them money, ask for something in return so that they feel that they're not just taking money, that they have some kind of like purpose or meaning, right? And he said, the question is, what do you ask a homeless person for? He said, ask them to pray for you. And I remembered that. I look at my review and I'm like, maybe I should ask, because I'm like, again, I'm praying out loud. Maybe I should ask that homeless guy to pray for me. And then I look up and I'm like, there's no way I'm going to talk to that guy.
Right.
He's going to attack me or I'm going to get hepatitis or something. So maybe it's someone else, not that guy. So I start walking into the studio. Literally, he's here. I'm parked over here. So I don't even walk towards him to get by him. I walk away. Okay. No eye contact, nothing. I'm walking away. And I hear him. Excuse me, sir. Excuse me. I turn around. It's him. I said, yeah. And he goes, have a nice day. Okay. Thank you. So I start to walk back and I pause and I go, and I start walking back towards him. I say, you know what? Can you do something for me? He said, sure. I say, can you pray for me? And he goes, yeah, what's the deal? And so I said, well, we're taking my daughter to the pediatrician to do an examination. And he goes, is it her spine? And I froze, man. Like I totally hit me. Like I almost stopped in my tracks and I said, yeah, it might be. I said, it's something called spinal tethering. And we're contemplating whether or not we need to do an MRI or not. And I said, could you pray for me? And he says, yes, absolutely. I'll pray for you. And then we start talking and he goes off and starts talking about some crazy wild stuff. Like he's obviously not 100% there. So I'm listening, we're talking a little bit. And so I said, hey, thank you for praying for me. He says, no problem. So then I thought maybe I should give him some money. But instead I said in my head, I thought maybe I'll just let me ask him if he needs anything, if he wants anything, because maybe he wants something else. So I said, you know what? Is there anything I can do for you? And he goes, no, there's nothing. He goes, actually, you've already done more for me than society's done in a long time. And that hit me again because the day before I had started loosely reading scripture and I read a story about, I think it was Jesus who said, what you do to the least of us or the least of your brothers and sisters, you do to me. And I was like, oh my gosh. Okay. I said, you're welcome. I walk into the studio, I sit in my chair and I had, Adam and Justin and Doug sitting there and I must have looked like, I don't know what I must have looked like I saw a ghost or something because they were all like, what's going on? I couldn't really speak. Started talking a little bit, started tearing up. I'm not one to tear up very easily. And I told them the story and everybody's like, oh my gosh. And I was like, okay, that was definitely God. Like for sure that was God. I just don't know what it means. Like, okay, you're there. I don't know. What does that mean? Does that mean that we get the MRI? Does that mean we don't? But at that moment, I was like, he that was for sure, because there was no way to explain it for me. There was no possible way. Crazy homeless person. Is it her spine? He mentions something that reminds me of scripture. It was just too much. I knew that was God. So I got up after our podcast. We did a show, get in my car, and I drive to the pediatrician's office. And I'm praying out loud again. God, thank you. You're there. You're real. Thank you. I said, I just don't know what it means. I don't know what that means. What does that mean? Does that mean that I should do the MRI? Does that mean I shouldn't? So we get to the pediatrician's office, and one of the challenges with this test was that my daughter is very shy and apprehensive. And if she goes to the doctor, she just clings to my wife's shirt. She won't come off her shirt, buries her head. If we weigh her or do anything, she cries. So I'm like, I don't know what she's going to test. My daughter won't do. She's not going to come off my wife's lap. So we get there, we walk into the appointment, and my daughter suddenly becomes the best performer you've ever seen in your life. Not only is she not shy, she's doing everything the pediatrician's asking. She's doing it in flying colors, as if it's like somebody she's known her whole life. I mean, she's standing, she's pushing, pointing, she's, everything the pediatrician wanted, she did. Pediatrician, after, I don't remember how long the test was, 10, 15 minutes, like with full confidence, looks at us and goes, she's totally fine. You guys are good. You don't have to do an MRI. And I was like, okay, that's it. Now I know what he was telling me. And then at that moment, I fully accepted and submitted. I don't need no more evidence. I don't need anything else. You are real. And that was it. And then things started to change radically.
Well, first of all, amazing testimony and story. That's incredible. And thanks for sharing that. You mentioned that you don't typically cry and you got really emotional. Like, why do you think you got so emotional?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think when you feel, and it happens to me now easily, if I feel his grace, it's overwhelming. Because when you really understand what it means, I mean, grace is undeserved. That's why it's called grace.
Right.
So imagine, I don't know how I could explain this. Imagine being the worst person to somebody and then them coming around and giving you the most amazing gift and helping you out. You're going to be like, why? Why would you? What? I don't understand. Because we're so broken. We're so broken. We're so screwed. We're so imperfect. And yet he just gives you this grace and you feel it. So it's overwhelming. And I'll feel it sometimes when I listen to worship music, or if I'm in church, or if I'm praying, or when I see him move into my children, my family. Like I'll pray for a particular relationship in my family. And suddenly that person will call me out of the blue and we're talking. And it's like, yeah, you can't help but get emotional.
And so you mentioned that you had struggles in your marriage. You had difficulties with pornography and lust. Like, were you feeling like undeserving of unconditional love? And do you think that in that moment you felt it for like the first time and that's what got you emotional?
It's more than that. I think it's that, plus it's people who receive grace give grace. So I suddenly found myself far less resentful, far more forgiving, far more understanding, far less self-centered, far more humble. I recognize other people's gifts and blessings and good qualities way more. It's easy to not see them. It's easy when you're hanging out with someone, you see someone and they have qualities that makes them act like or something like that. It's easy for you to just say that screw that whole person. But, suddenly I could see that and have compassion, but also see the good qualities in that person and feel almost like a sense of love or care for that individual. It's profound. It's profound. It's the most profound thing that I can't even believe. I'll never go back.
Last question I have for you is, a lot of my struggles in becoming a Christian, I would say the most common thing with people is, if God is real, why do messed up things happen in the world? How do you explain that?
This is a good question. And it's the one that atheists and secular people will bring to Christians all the time, or any religious individual. The oldest book of the Bible is widely believed to be Job, the book of Job. If you read that book, Job was in the Bible, it says, a righteous, good man. So undeserving of bad stuff. And God permits bad things to happen to him. He gets disease. His servants leave him. He loses livestock. They die. He gets covered in boils. And his friends come to him who are supposedly wise and say, you must have done something to deserve this. You must have done something. Maybe you should do this. Maybe his wife tells him, why do you still praise God? Look what he's doing to you. The whole book is about that. And at the end of it, God basically shows him how God's timeline and what he works with is very different than ours, and how everything is used for his purpose, which is always good. All right, so what does that mean? That means, and it's the oldest book. So it's like one of the most important lessons. What does that mean? That means in your 100 years you're going to live on this earth, if you're healthy, right? That 100 years pales in comparison to eternity. Your circumstances, however numerous they are, pale in comparison to the infinite circumstances of eternity. So, they say God works in mysterious ways. He uses all things. We know how it ends, though. It ends with glory. But, we could use some explanations in worldly ways to try, if bad things didn't happen, good people wouldn't be able to do good things also. There's bad things that exist and terrible things because it's a broken world. But yeah, he uses everything. So you'll see some of the most devout Christians in terrible circumstances be in joy and praise God. And I don't think it's interesting. You could look at that and go, how dumb. Or you could look at that and go, I want that because I'm going to go through challenges. I'm going to go through struggles for sure. I want to find that joy. How is that boy with cancer who knows he's terminal joyful for God right now? And if he can do that, I want to feel that as well. So I can't explain other than I don't think we'd ever be able to understand how he uses everything for his purposes. And it's just too much to consider.
Well, Sal, this has been amazing. I really love this hybrid conversation we've had where we spent the first half of the conversation talking about fat loss and muscle building and all the things that you're known for. But I really, really appreciated you being open with your testimony and your journey with faith. I think the audience is going to get a lot of value out of this conversation. So thanks again.
I hope so. Thanks. I appreciate it, man.
You got it, man.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I really think you're going to like this video as well. I'll see you there.